Next slide.
This meeting is being recorded.
So first, for all our new joiners today, let me give you some background on who we are and what we do. Women at Tech was founded in 2019 in an effort to give back to the community, and now has members from 10 companies: Amazon, Box, BT, Cisco, Call Technology Services, Expedia, Meta, Google, McKinsey, Uber, and it's growing. We are committed to raising the impact of gender equality initiatives at technology industry companies in the UK. Next slide. Women at Tech is a collaborative community that shares best practices, innovation, and insights on an ongoing basis to help our member companies achieve a more gender equal workplace. After our event on financial security with our guest speaker, Aisha van den Paijer, in January, we are thrilled to celebrate this International Women's Day with you and with our amazing guests today, who are all impressive female role models that can inspire us to think bigger and to aim higher. To more fully explore the idea of breaking the bias, we want to go beyond simply acknowledging our female leaders. We want them to talk about the experiences and share real-world stories about some thought-provoking topics and how they, as individuals, are helping to move the world to a little closer towards the goal of gender equality. We will have about half an hour discussion, and then we'll open up to Q&A from the audience. So please start sending us your questions using the chat box as we kick off with the discussion. Now, next slide. Please welcome Beck Xiao from Uber, Opeyemi Sofoluke from Meta, and Anna Weiner from Google. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Happy to kick off. My name's Bex. I'm head of community operations for the UK and Ireland rides business at Uber. What does community operations really mean? Well, it's all about making sure that we provide the best customer support for Uber riders and drivers when they tell us something goes wrong, and hold the business accountable for continuously improving our Uber service. Been at Uber for about 6 years now. Actually, this week is my 6-year Uberversary, and have done a number of thank you. Feels like a lifetime. I've done a number of different roles in my time: expansion operations, sustainability efforts, new product launches, and before that I was working in finance. Definitely incredibly excited to be on the panel, very passionate about diversity and inclusion and championing women within the workplace. And for the past year I've been co-chairing the Uber Women at Uber Employee Resource Group for Europe, Middle East and Africa.
All right, I'll jump in and go next. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be joining you today. My name is Opeyemi Sofoluke, and I'm the lead International Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager at Meta. In my role, I have the privilege of managing our Meta employee resource groups across international. And so for us, that's Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and Latin America. And in this role, I really kind of work with these groups to support their mission of building a more inclusive workplace, and partner with them as they build their strategy to really create that environment of belonging here at Meta. I'm also the co-author of a book called Twice as Hard, which I wrote with my husband. And Twice as Hard is a book that explores the experiences of Black entrepreneurs and professionals in the working world. In many ways, I would say that the goal of the book was twofold. An element of it is it's targeted to the Black community in some ways to absolutely encourage them and guide people as they build their careers and grow in business on how to challenge stereotypes and set themselves up for success. And then the other focus area I would say for the book is for allies that are really seeking to understand the experiences of Black entrepreneurs and professionals, to really inform them on some of the challenges we experience. And we kind of hope through that, having that information, people will feel more equipped to be active allies and incredibly intentional in the way they look to support Black colleagues, both at work and in business. Also, being a woman, super passionate about women rights and creating a more equal workforce. So really excited to be on this panel today and share some of my insights along with the other two incredible panelists I'm here with.
Thank you. That's really impressive. Anna?
Hi there. Don't know about you, I'm already very excited and thrilled to hear from my fellow panelists. Nice to meet you. I'm Anna Weiner. I'm the founder of I Am Remarkable. And that's actually not just my day job. In my day job, I look after Think with Google for EMEA, as well as ads growth marketing. So it's really about bringing Google's insights to our advertisers and partners and the marketing community. I've been at Google for 11.5 years across several countries and regions, working both on B2B marketing and B2C, brand and reputation. And I'm a mom of two wonderful and cute kids, a boy and a girl, and they're 1 and 3.
Amazing. Thank you so much all. And thank you so much for being here with us today. So the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias, which is aimed at creating a world free of bias, free of stereotypes, free of discrimination. Bias is prevalent in every aspect of our lives. Our brains are hardwired to categorize things as we encounter them and in order to make sense of the world around us. However, biases can cause us to form prejudice against others, which allows us to form inequalities between different demographics. For example, at work, performance review bias might happen when employers, managers, and colleagues review an employee of one gender differently from another gender, even when the evaluations are purely merit-based. So I was going to ask you to start with, could you please share with us a challenging time when you've experienced bias? This could be directly or as a bystander, and your journey to overcome this and create a more equal workplace.
Yeah, I can take this one. So when I think about bias, it actually brings me back to the age of 7. So before we even talk about the workplace, I think we all can attest that we've experienced being treated in a biased way, even from growing up. I was born in Belarus, and I moved with my family to Israel when I was 6.5. And I remember me and my brother walking home from school one day, and this group of kids come to us and they tell us, you're Russian. By the way, we were from Belarus, we weren't Russian, but it's a bit of a different story. And I remember my brother looking at that kid and going, yeah, and you're Israeli. And the kid was so shocked because he was sure that if he tells us you're Russian, we're going to be offended, or we're going to, it's going to make us feel less in some sort of way. And he was so shocked when my brother answered him and told him, you're Israeli, that he quieted down and walked away. And that was such a powerful moment when I was growing up, of saying, yeah, people might see you in a lot of different ways and might assume a lot of different abilities or skills that you might have just because of where you're from or how you look or what's your religion or what's your height. And in the end of the day, I think this is where I'm thinking about a lot of the efforts that we're doing across the world, and both around gender, but also a lot about other areas of diversity, where we really need to uncover those unconscious biases and bring them to life. Because, if you think about unconscious bias, you are actually not aware that you're practicing those biases towards the people around you, whether it might be at work or it might be even with friends or family or just out there in the world. And a lot of the work that we do, for example, with Unremarkable, is how can we bring those biases to awareness? Because only at the second that you bring those biases to awareness, you can actually change your behavior. And when you think about those biases, you're actually, by practicing them and by acting on those unconscious biases or even conscious biases. So a lot of, we always treat unconscious bias, but many people have actually very conscious biases, and they choose to still treat other people based on these biases. And we can really see from a lot of research and our personal experience that we're missing out on a lot of people out there just because we're practicing these conscious and unconscious biases. And we'll talk more about how we do that in Unremarkable, but I would love to also hear from our other panelists on this point.
Yeah, happy to jump in, Anna. And I think my points are really just re-emphasizing what you were saying there. Throughout my career, and I've been in quite male-dominated industries, finance, operations, when I think back, there's not one specific moment where there was a really hurtful situation where I could pinpoint and say, hey, that person was unjustly treating me unfairly or being really sexist towards me. But actually, that's what's more telling about the micro behaviors that people don't often acknowledge, to what you were saying, Anna. And from my experience, I'm lucky in that, I've had few people who have been intentionally and overtly biased towards me. But that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't inherent biases in the workplace and in our lifetime, just in our general day-to-day. We all have natural biases, whether that's stereotypically subconscious views people naturally hold about gender or culture, religion. And there's always tendencies that men naturally get on better with men, and men will likely agree far easier with other men. And so these behaviors, they aren't intentional, but they can have a negative impact on a woman's experience above a man's. And it is also just exacerbated far more when there's more men in a workplace, hence the real push for gender parity within the workplace. And so in order to really, truly make an inclusive environment, we've got to all be mindful and aware, as you say, Anna, to these micro biases. And so two ways that certainly I've learned to, learned and I'm still learning to combat these. Firstly, it's to look inwards and to really build your own self-confidence, which I think really feeds into a lot of what I Am Remarkable is all about. Why start with yourself? You are your biggest controllable. You are the person who knows yourself the best. You are the person who can drive you, and you're the person who can vouch and shout for you. And so building up that inner confidence means that you can really be strong and secure in your own strength, so that you won't let these micro biases hinder what you want to achieve. And then the second one is really around supporting allies, building those allies around you so that you can really, as an
I think we've lost Bex there.
Yeah, seems like I thought it was on my side. So maybe while we're waiting for Bex, Opeyemi, maybe you can jump in and talk from your DIY expertise hat. Maybe if you could please share with us some of your ideas, and maybe how would you suggest we might mitigate this to ensure women are able to progress in their career and access decision-making positions, especially given the challenging context?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's a great question. As we know, many companies do promote inclusive practices, and there is so much research out there that exists showing us that mixed gender teams boost company profitability. But the reality is, marginalised community, and specifically in this context, women, we still experience bias. And so, of course, that question comes to mind: why does this exist? Why is this problem still here? And I think at the root of it, a lot of it has to do with societal beliefs about men and women and leadership, and the kind of characteristics and behaviours that we associate with men and women when thinking about leadership. But as we heard from the experiences that Bex and Anna shared, it is clear that there is more work to do. And so when we think about the organisation and the role that the organisation has to play, the first thing that comes to mind is educating our employees on gender bias. I think the thing is with gender bias, it's something that people expect people to be aware of, but actually it's really important that we don't make an assumption here and assume that everyone knows what gender bias is and how it manifests itself in the workplace. And so there really is this need for organisations to be super intentional actually about how we inform and how we educate our employees on what gender bias is. And so whether that is through formal training programs that are designed to help employees understand how to recognise gender bias and combat these kind of behaviours, or if it's inclusive leadership courses or allyship training, you know, I'm sure all our organisations have programs like this, the list goes on. There is really a key role for the organisation to take on in this effort. And it's really important that we don't leave it to chance. And then actually, when I think about it, it's almost a two-pronged approach where, you know, we focus on challenging people's mindsets with training, but we also need to not just focus on tackling bias internally in the individual, but also the biases that we find in the systems, in the structures, in the ways of working. And so there really is a need for organisations to also focus on fixing and improving, and in some cases, going back to basics and actually changing systems to dismantle and remove gender biased practices. And so what do I mean by this? So let's take our recruiting and hiring processes, for example, or when we look at the data that we have available, there's a need for us to take time to understand how we are growing and developing women in the workplace. Some of the questions you may ask yourself if you're in an organisation is there a need to introduce mentoring or sponsorship programs to provide clear growth opportunities for women at work? Do we need to be more intentional about how we highlight women across the business? And actually, being a Black woman, do we create a space where women from different backgrounds feel comfortable to show up as their best selves, as their authentic selves, and still be considered for leadership opportunities? So I think really actually changing both the mindset, but also the systems will play a key role in countering stereotypical behaviours we see in the organisation. And then finally, being the person that I am, while I believe we shouldn't expect women on their own to fix these societal problems, I am a strong believer in doing what I can to create the best working environment for myself. And I think we all kind of have a role to play in that as well. And so I would say from a personal standpoint, having experienced bias from a number of angles, being Black, being a woman, having a strong South London accent, I'm aware of how I show up in different environments. And I have been very aware of this from the beginning of my career. And so I've been super intentional about the role I have to play also in breaking the biases that people may have towards me, and investing in myself so that I can show up as my best self at work, and actually in doing that challenge the biases that we see. So I would definitely say it's a combination of, yes, organisations have the role to play from challenging and changing people's mindsets, from challenging the systems that are at work, but also taking it to the individual, you know, to say, what can I do differently? And for me, a lot of that was, you know, getting coaching and just becoming more confident and owning who you are when you go into a room. So that's some of the recommendations I would say.
That was a really nice summary, actually, at the end. As you say, changing the whole kind of mindset, changing the systems, but also starting from yourself and thinking what you can do and how you can change that perception as well. Bex, I think you're back now, so maybe we can start with you with this second topic. I would like to move on to the women's well-being and life stages. And many women are dealing with additional and sometimes invisible issues that have an effect on mental and physical health at different stages of life, such as menstruation, egg freezing, fertility struggles, postnatal depression, pressures of motherhood, menopause. And many of these have been intensified during pandemic and work from home time. So Bex, how do we have more open conversation about these things, and what can we do to support women better across their life stages?
Yeah, so firstly, my Wi-Fi never cuts out, but typically it cuts out when I'm on a panel. So if it cuts out again when I'm answering this question, just scrap me from the panel. So yeah, open conversations about these things. So I don't think women actually talk about life topics enough. So the points that you raise, female health, whether it's mental or physical, fertility, motherhood, but I actually think it's much broader than those topics alone. And it's really about topics that potentially women struggle with more than men. So topics like salary expectations, managing your finances, understanding your pension, how to have those career conversations, how to have those promotion conversations. And these topics are a little bit taboo. Certainly it's not openly discussed within different forums when they could be. And so what can we do about that? Firstly, we can use our work space to bring the open conversations into work. Work and life are not separate. They're so intertwined together. A stable, happy life means you're performing at your best self and showing up as your best self, as Opeyemi was saying. And let's bring some of the experts in to actually educate and open the conversation about some of these topics. I was really impressed by Uber recently bringing in a fertility clinic in to talk through the science behind fertility, the practical tips about how you would want to get pregnant if you wanted to get pregnant, and also the options that you have if you want to wait for pregnancy. I don't have kids just yet, but that topic, bringing that topic into the workplace was a really good way of actually me being able to have that open conversation with other female colleagues within that space. Secondly, we've got an incredible network of people, whether it's your friends or people from other industries. I've had friends who have done egg freezing and have gone through that experience, and I have friends who are considering it, and actually connecting those two together, it means that they can share each other's experiences. I also remember a friend a couple of years back who was significantly underpaid for her qualifications, but she didn't realize that until she actually had those open conversations with me and other people. And you start sharing, okay, how much is your salary and versus your qualifications? And then she realized and had then the motivation to speak to her manager about it. And finally, we've got to bring men into the conversations. We need men to be our biggest allies through these life stages and life challenges. How does your male manager know how to support you through pregnancy unless we help to educate them on what it's all about? He'll need to support you to return back to office. How can leadership support and understand what we need to bring in structurally into the business to actually accommodate for whether it's hybrid working options or more equal parental leave? And so, yeah, we've all got to go on that journey together, but we have to force those open conversations together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Kind of coming back from maternity leave, and sometimes it's quite challenging experience for women to kind of resume their careers after that. So maybe Anna and Opeyemi, we can continue with this discussion. How can we be more supportive of returning women to ensure that their career progression isn't negatively impacted?
Yeah, so I've been through that process twice in the past 3 years. So I think it's definitely not just about coming back to work. It's also about the period that you're pregnant, and we should not forget that. I think many people are kind of neglecting that period, but you're definitely, or at least for me, I have to say, I never felt that I'm at my 100% during those 9 months. or even for the period before that, right? Like you might be experiencing struggles and stress that is related to getting pregnant. And so I think number one, normalizing the conversation, like Bex mentioned, I think making this not a taboo and openly talking about these topics is step number one. Because there is a lot, I think that many times there is a lot of shame around these areas that people might not necessarily feel comfortable talking about. So I think definitely bringing role models and having more people talk openly, both in the workplace, both with your friends and family, and in the media, you definitely see a lot more people talking about this. So that would definitely be step number one. And it can start as a grassroots movement. So yeah, definitely companies can go top down on this, but I think it's really up to us as well to normalize those conversations and create those forums for us to talk about this. And this is across all employees, not just women. It's definitely for everyone, because it impacts everyone, whether you're a colleague or a manager or a partner or an agency working with a client. It's going to impact you at some sort of way. So that I would say is number one. When we talk about maternity leave, paternity leave, I think these are areas that definitely I heard a really wonderful conversation yesterday from a dad. And when you look at what is probably going to be the biggest impact on influencing women's career with returning back to work, is making sure that dads or parents get the same time off, the same as moms or women going on maternity leave. Because if you have a woman who's going to be away for a year, plus don't forget those 9 months that she was pregnant and not at her 100% in many cases, versus you have a dad or a parent who actually was there the whole time and took the 2 weeks maybe that you can, you get in the UK. It gets managers and colleagues to look at you at a different way. And one thing that actually he raised that I thought was super interesting is, when you get pregnant, you have to notify officially to your employer that you're pregnant with a MAT B1 form that you get from your midwife. Men don't need to do that. They don't need to go to their manager and say, hey, I'm going to have a baby in 15 weeks. And they don't, there is no, it's not the same pressures and not the same set of kind of stress creators that you see for women who are in many, many cases would try to avoid the conversation or would defer the conversation or would not apply for a new role or a new promotion when she gets pregnant, because there is all of these areas around this. So definitely, I think if there is one thing I would love to see is having more equalized time off for both parents.
Yeah.
And this is, I think if there is one element that is going to be a game changer in the world, is that. But if we look at other areas of coming back to work, I think there is, you see a lot of companies that are doing a lot of work, and Google actually just expanded the paternity leave for that. So I think that's really, really great to see. And I know a lot of other companies do that as well. And when it comes to coming back to work, so I can share from my experience and what happens in Google. So for the first 2 weeks when you come back, you get to work 50%. So you have gradual return to work, which is very, very helpful, because it's a very turbulent time to move away from being 100% at home, not working, dealing with your newborn and looking after your probably, most precious thing that you create in your life, to going back to being Anna, the professional, the team manager, the colleague, the man, you know, it's a very sharp shift. And I think it takes time to get back to that notion of working. And a lot of support is required from at that point, both from your manager and your colleagues and your manager's manager and the system itself. And simply acknowledging that it's a hard time, that's already helpful. And I think if you're a manager and you have a person on your team who's coming back from maternity or paternity leave, so having that open conversation and acknowledging that it's going to be a turbulent time, but also giving the stage and the opportunity for the person coming back to tell you what they need. So I think the very important thing is to not make assumptions. Don't assume that just because somebody came back from maternity or paternity leave, they are not able to travel, or that they won't be able to take on that big project that just because they have this new role in life. So I think it's really around not making assumptions and asking a lot of questions and opening the stage for people to share what they need. And also educating yourself. If you haven't been in that situation, talk to more people and ask them how they feel and what could have helped them or what is going to help them. So there is, you know, I think that self-education piece is very, very important, as in any other area that we talk about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You probably would have seen a lot of head nods as Anna was sharing. I'm also a mother of two, so I've been through this process twice. I have a 4-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter who will be 2 next month. And for me, there were so many lessons I learned across the 2 maternity leaves. And actually, before I jump into my answer, I think it's helpful to provide some context here around my experience. So I was at a different organisation at the time when I had my children. And I had great support from my team and my manager. But I knew with my first mat leave that it was going to impact promotion. I knew with my first mat leave, you know, there were some opportunities that I was going to miss out on. And I was incredibly sick during both pregnancies. So you can imagine there is this massive sense of guilt that you experience, or that I experienced, and many women experience when going through this process. And so to Anna's point, it's really important that we create an environment at work where women feel safe and feel comfortable to share what they're going through. I remember during my first pregnancy, I hid a lot of my sickness as much as I could. It wasn't like work now where we're working from home on Zoom or whatever a video system you use at work. And so you can kind of hide what you're experiencing, but I really couldn't. And so we really should actually think about how we provide support during pregnancy, not just when women are on mat leave and when they return, but actually while they're pregnant, during their maternity leave, and when they return. And actually, if I was to go into all these 3 categories, we will be here for some time. So in the interest of time, I will focus on when returning to work, how can we provide more support for women? I think one of the first things to do is actually just before a woman goes on maternity leave or someone takes paternity leave is have a conversation with your manager around how you want to communicate with them during your time off. The reality is when we are away from work, whether it's a year, 9 months, 6 months, things are always changing. And I've spoken to many mothers who have come back from work and actually they feel like they don't belong because they don't know what's been going on. They feel that like they're not in the loop. And it's actually okay if you don't want to hear from your employer during your time off while you're having maternity leave. But if you do want to hear kind of key updates, if there's been a reorg, for example, that you express this to your manager. And so they're aware of how you want to hear from them so that actually when you return to work, you do feel kind of in the loop. Another thing I would say, again, from a mother's perspective, is to use your keep in touch days, and also for managers to encourage mothers to use that if they want to. And I remember using mine to attend offsites or coming into the office for half days just to connect with my team and kind of just get up to speed on what was going on. And I found that incredibly helpful. It kind of gave me a reminder of, okay, this is what the work routine is like. My manager at the time was wonderful. She had twins, and so she was really familiar with what it felt like going away and coming back. And so she said, you know, practice, go to the nursery, you know, come into the office afterwards, see what the journey time feels like, just to get a feel for it. And so when you have supportive managers and teams that accommodate for things like that, that's incredibly helpful. I would also say it's really important to have conversations with women to understand what their needs are as they come back to work. As Anna has already shared, this is a massive change in your life, and you want to come back to work and still deliver, and you will deliver, you will be incredible, but there should be this grace period to kind of get back into the swing of things. And so it's really important that employers, managers, colleagues do show support and also demonstrate trust, because there is going to be some days where you may have to leave work early or you may come in slightly later, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that, or you shouldn't kind of do that discreetly. And so there needs to be more open conversation around this. And then more practical things that I found incredibly helpful, you know, buddy partnerships and peer support networks. So the mum groups at work here at Meta, we have a number of clubs and workplace groups, and there are a number of mothers groups online where we share helpful tips and resources on things that work well for us. And I think having those groups can be really helpful in just sharing experiences. And then more specifically around progression, taking maternity leave shouldn't negate from the impact that you've made at work or the work that you've delivered before the time you take off. And having kind of gone through an experience where I did miss out on promotion in my first year or my first maternity leave, the second time round, I was more intentional around having conversations with leaders to manage expectations, and both of our expectations of what I hope to achieve, regardless of the fact that I was going on maternity leave, and how I expected my organization at the time to recognize my contribution and the work that I have been doing. So I would say, you know, as much as you can, take control, have those conversations, depending on the promotion process at your work, if that is something you're going for, have the conversation with your manager to understand what that process will look like when you're on maternity leave, because, you know, if you have delivered, then you absolutely should be recognized. And so I think there's a number of ways to think about how we ensure women returning to work feel confident, feel comfortable, but also feel that they have the space to settle in when they return.
Yeah, it's a really big topic, isn't it? And we can talk about this a lot of hours for a long time. It's really useful tips. So thank you so much for all the advices. I'm sure everyone else has found them really inspiring and useful. I know we are 40 minutes in the hour, and I still want to focus on one more question, maybe for the next 5 minutes, and then we can start taking questions from the audiences. So while we're talking about this, please start sending us your questions and we'll take them after this. But I thought, as we are talking about all these big issues and big topics affecting our communities, there's still more. There's still a lot of kind of unconscious biases that, you know, we can uncover here. So, for example, there's a lot of research showing that women and also men frown upon women who self-promote themselves. We also hear from our community that women have a less good experience than men, and women with complex and overlapping intersectional identities, for example, women of color, even worse. And Anna, I know you mentioned this at the beginning. This is something that I'm exposes remarkably, pun intended. Could you please tell us a bit more about this, and generally, how do you support women and intersectional women with more intentionally? And what advice you have for people who want to be allies?
Let me unmute first. Technology today is wonderful. So let me just touch upon that stat that you shared, that both men and women don't like women who promote themselves. And this is one of the stats or research that we actually share in the Unremarkable workshop. And I can tell about that piece. It came from firsthand experience, and I'm sure that many of our listeners here can relate to that feeling. But when we talk about when we actually, where Unremarkable came to life from was actually a workshop that I took at Google 7 years ago. And we were sitting there, it was all women, and we were asked to write down our accomplishments and then to stand in front of the group and read them out loud. And I was sitting there and I was listening to all of these women talk, and I was like thinking to myself, oh my God, why are they bragging? And that was the exercise. Like literally, that we were in a closed room. It was all clear that it's an exercise. It's not real life scenario. And still I was sitting there and thinking that to myself. And after leaving that session, it hung up with me for so long. I was, this was a wrong feeling. I was saying to myself, and actually Unremarkable kind of came to life from that experience when I realized together with a good colleague of mine and my co-founder, that this is a problem that we should be tackling, of unraveling and showing and bringing those unconscious biases to life. And this is just about men and women, but let's talk for a second. You touched upon intersectionality and how in general, we touch upon them. So when we talk about I'm Remarkable, it actually started as an initiative for women because we saw a lot of research that touches upon that gender gap. But when we started running the workshops, we realized that there are a lot of underrepresented groups that are affected by exactly the same insights of of modesty, of being taught to be modest from a very young age and to not talk about your accomplishments so you don't look like you're bragging, and don't boast and don't be all out there. But I do want to uncover that underrepresented group piece for 1 second, because when I say that, I think many of us are immediately thinking about the kind of the general groups that we would talk about when we talk about underrepresented. But I want to challenge for a second that naming and to show you that all of us are underrepresented in different ways and in different circumstances. Because if I am an immigrant from the former Soviet Union and I sit in a room filled with people speaking a language, for example, that I don't speak, I will be underrepresented. If you take a middle-aged white male from the US and you take that person and you pop them in India in a room, they would be underrepresented. They would suddenly feel very out of place many times. So I think when we talk about underrepresented, it's really, it's also about who you are, your identity, and how you perceive yourself. And by the way, I think we really need to question that, because, if you would ask me what my identity, an external person would tell, she's a 30-something woman, but I would tell you, or, a 30-something woman, Israeli expat who lived abroad for many years, a mom. But I might tell you something different about my identity, that it's not anything that you can see from an external standpoint. Maybe the way that I would introduce myself is, hi, I'm Anna. Yeah, I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur, and I love to travel. Maybe that's what I want you to know about me. And it's not related by any means to where I'm from, what's my skin color, what's my religion, what's my family status, what's my physical status, etc. So I think what we really touch upon in I'm Remarkable is uncovering these unconscious biases. So we really aim everybody who's going through this workshop to be aware of the different unconscious biases that we all face. But the second thing is to really, how can you become the best you that you can be? It's really not about comparing your achievements to others people's achievements. It's really focusing about you inside you, Anna, what are your accomplishments? And let's put them all on one page and show you that you are remarkable with everything that you've done to date, and how we can help you to celebrate all of these achievements and become the best you that you can be.
Yeah.
And that's really what we push for.
Yeah, we are all unique and all remarkable, as you say, Anna. That's a really good summary. We have a question from the audience here, actually, as we were speaking, and it's for Opeyemi and Bex. And it says, as women of color, have you experienced POC, female discrimination? And how do you manage your mental well-being in these situations? The effects of it in the moment and the afterwards too. And it always feels like a lifelong battle. And it's been said, this gets difficult the more senior you become.
Thank you for that question. I'm happy to give it a shot first and then hand over to Bex. I would say currently in my career, I do feel privileged to be in an environment that encourages people and where I feel encouraged and empowered to show up as my best authentic self. But I would definitely say yes, in my career, I have experienced bias, discrimination, and to that point around how to manage, your mental well-being when you experience this. I love the fact that we actually have conversations around mental well-being more frequently. I think this is a topic that in recent years has become more popular, and rightly so, because it's something we need to be conscious and aware of. And I would say from a personal perspective, to Anna's point around owning your greatness, it's really important to remind yourself, who you are, what you've done, what you've achieved. And sometimes I literally stand in front of the mirror and I say, like, yes, Opeyemi, you are great. And you have to remind yourself. I think those affirmations are a great way of, on a personal level for me, dealing with some of the challenges or encouraging myself in moments where I may not feel confident, because we are all human. And there will be moments where we may question our ability, particularly environments where we are the minority or we are seen to be the marginalized community. I've also learned in my career that the perspective someone has about me does not define me. And so if someone does hold a stereotype or is biased towards me, that's their personal problem and not my own. And again, it goes back to remembering who you are and what value you can add to the organization, the place that you're in. And then again, I would say in managing this, again, when you're thinking about mental well-being, take time to pause. Think about what brings you joy. When I've had a tough day, or in previous years, where I've potentially worked with challenging colleagues, I've had to take time and surround myself with people who bring me joy, and take time to focus on things that will make me feel more positive. And I sometimes think it's those simple things that can make a difference. And finally, I would say, keep record of your wins. When you're in an environment where it's easy to feel overlooked, or you feel that you are not being offered the same opportunities as your counterparts, potentially your white counterparts, or maybe even other white women in the organization, as an individual, there is a role you can play in keeping track of the impact you're making, gathering feedback, not just from your colleagues, from cross-functional partners, so that you can see that actually, I am doing what's required of me and more. And then if there are gaps that can be closed, if there are opportunities to develop, then you're aware of that. And so when that time comes to have the performance discussions, you're able to kind of go back to these examples and say, right, look, these are just some of the ways that I have demonstrated leadership, or I have made added value to a particular project. And so I would definitely say, yeah, to summarize, remember how great you are, as Anna has already said, pause, recognize what brings you joy and spend time doing that. And then just keep records of your wins so you can share those and the impact that you're making.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that. And just to go back to, I guess, the microaggressions or the discrimination that you potentially feel in the workplace or in your personal life. I think one thing that it really does do is massively negatively couple with imposter syndrome, which can be a real painful combination, particularly for a woman. And imposter syndrome is real. It's a mindset shift where you're not feeling good enough about yourself, you're not pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, and you're definitely not doing your work to your absolute best abilities. And it feeds into a lot of what Opeyemi and Anna was saying about really championing your strengths, listing out your achievements, bragging, which is awkward. It's difficult. It's not our natural nature. It's certainly not my natural nature to be that bragging, boasting self, just to really feel secure in your own strength. Imposter syndrome, how do I think about it and how do I deal with it? Firstly, I actually find talking about it with your colleagues and your peers is, again, to the open conversation, a really good way to break that barrier. It's so often that your peers and your colleagues and your friends, your boyfriend, your husband, your partner will see you so much more objectively in terms of feedback about who you are and your strengths than you necessarily give yourself credit for. And so get that insight, get that perspective of how other people see you in that full light where you potentially don't give yourself enough love and attention for. And the second thing I would say is take that risk and lean in to those uncomfortable, awkward, new situations that will be an opportunity for you. You know, that project that gives you that stretch opportunity, that new role or that new promotion. It's really about pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and also just being a little bit more willing to fail. I was actually speaking to a colleague yesterday who said, he was a male colleague, and he said, men are just naturally brought up failing all the time. You know, they ask out loads of women, they get rejected all the time. They're constantly in competition with other men. They're constantly doing sports and they're failing all the time. And perhaps in some cases, women don't necessarily take that, you know what, let's just go for it. What's the worst that can happen attitude? We have high standards. We're perfectionists. We don't want to take that step if we know that it might actually lead to not working out as well as we wanted it to. But what is the worst that can happen? You know, the worst that can happen is we learn, we pick ourselves up again, and it is that new experience. So, I mean, certainly my advice to you all is imposter syndrome isn't a bad thing. It is, in fact, a symptom of success. Share, shout, praise yourself. Also get that from your other colleagues, friends, and partners. But most importantly, just make sure that you're really pushing for that next opportunity. Don't be afraid to fail.
Actually, that leads us to the next question. I know we are having only 4 minutes left, so maybe just one sentence advice on this question. Women often get called aggressive and direct. I think we mentioned this earlier, when we are straightforward and up to the point. Have you ever had a time where you have been perceived as aggressive or direct when a male colleague may not be called out on that when making the same comment? Is the best way to tackle this to soften our approach, or what is the best way to tackle this to soften our approach? So maybe one sentence advice to everyone here.
Yeah, maybe I can take this one. By the way, this is also very cultural. So the cultural context is very, very critical. And I can share one experience that I had when I moved from Israel to the UK in my first month. And if you think about culture, I think Israelis and British are exactly the opposite. So I don't know if you know, there is a really good chart that shows you like the more outgoing, outspoken cultures versus the more inverse ones. So basically Israelis and British are exactly on the opposite sides of it. And on the first month when I moved, I got challenged with a project to finish with 1 month to do something that is supposed to take 3 months, which is, I think in itself is a very good challenge. And to be able to achieve that, I had to push our agency to deliver much faster. And one of those directors at that agency went to my manager at the time and said, listen, we can't work with Anna. Anna is too aggressive and she's really pushing our teams beyond capacity. And then I really enjoyed what happened then, because then he came to me and he said, listen, you got this feedback, but you're actually doing a great job. Please continue doing what you're doing. So I think at that point, having a manager who was supportive and agreeing with the direction that I was taking was very, very helpful, because, if it was a different situation, I was relatively junior at that time, these moments can really crush your confidence and can really get you to question yourself. So I think one tip here is maybe try to align on your strategy and your approach with your manager, and to also kind of sense check where you are, and get alignment and support to the way that you're acting and behaving. I do have to say that over my 7 years living in the UK, I had to course correct many times. So you also need to be aware of how the environment and how your colleagues do perceive the way that you talk and you behave. And I think it's a lot of failing and learning and course correcting and getting feedback and accepting feedback, but also keeping true to yourself. I have to say, I might have settled down and grew and learned to be maybe a bit more subtle in different situations, but I'm still me, and the core values that guide me are still the same ones that were there 7 years ago.
Great, that's a really good tip. We're almost on time now, actually, we're spot on time. So thank you so much, Bex, Opeyemi, and Anna, and for joining us today, and for having such an open conversation with us and our community, and also for sharing all this valuable wisdom. Women leaders like you are key to inspiring the next generation, giving hope and changing perceptions. So thank you again. Happy International Day, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.